Well, my name's Ken Harvey. I'm from Xiamen University. I'm from America, but I'm in Malaysia at Xiamen University, Malaysia. Um, I teach here a class called Success Strategies, and I'm going to share some of the ideas that I share with my students in that class. Can you hear me okay? Is everything ready to go? So are we ready to proceed? Or are we still having problems here?
Sir, are you getting our voice, sir?
Excuse me? We okay? So, okay, I wasn't understanding. Are we ready to begin then? Can I go ahead?
Yeah, yes, sir. You can go ahead.
Okay. Well, you see in this start page, the subtitle of this, Success Strategies, is How Startups Succeed and How You Can Be Part of the Next Big Deal. I also have created a website you see at the bottom of that slide at iei.tv.net/success. And I'm going to put all these slides, but also many videos on that for those that are interested in pursuing this further. Oops. Okay, before I get into I'm going to reflect a lot of the ideas of a Harvard professor, one of the top Harvard professors, Clayton Christensen. But before that, I can kind of explain why I chose this subject. I wanted to share a story from a presentation by Seth Godin. And again, many of the references I'm going to have include references to videos, video lectures by some of the some really good teachers themselves, such as Seth Godin. He explains that in the early 1910s, there was a man named Otto Rohwedder who sold his jewelry store in the USA to fund his efforts to invent a sliced bread maker. In much of the world, especially the United States, it's hard to find bread that is not sliced. But anyway, when he created it, however, it was 15 years before it really took off. In fact, it didn't take off until the Great Depression. And of course, the Great Depression, people didn't have very much money, but nonetheless, a company named Wonder Bread, began marketing it. And by 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, let me bring myself a little bit closer here. By then, half of America was, at least more than half, was eating their bread pre-sliced by Wonder and by then their competitors. So my point here is, actually, the people who invent things, you guys are all technologists, are training to be technologists and programmers and so forth, but you may not benefit from your technology. You may not benefit from your innovation unless you learn some of the things that I'm going to teach today. Because again, Otto Rohwedder hardly benefited. He did ultimately benefit quite a bit from his machine, but he was not the one that did it. He wasn't the key. It was marketers for Wonder Bread who made it happen. And frequently there's challenges. I gave a lecture at Amity University near New Delhi a couple of years ago, and they challenged me when I said that newspapers were going to disappear. They said, "Oh, in India, newspapers are doing fine," and indeed, it may seem that way. But from my research, I'm convinced that people will find, ultimately, the technology we take for granted in most of the world, mobile phones and so forth, smartphones, are going to become so widespread and so popular, even with with older generations and so forth. Right now, the older generations in all the countries are a little bit reluctant to get as much as younger people do from their smartphones. But I perceive we're having some problem here, but it's growing rapidly. And frankly, this older generation, including myself, are gradually going to die off. And then the whole world changes as the younger generations begin to dominate, the ones that actually really have become where the smartphone is basically part of they're very, you might say, an intimate part of their lives. They hardly live without it. Anyway, and there are all sorts of opportunities. Sometimes it takes innovation, not for the technology, but how to get the technology, such as the case with the sliced bread machine, 15 years before somebody figured out how to market it. So the machine was created, but the marketing was not. In Kazakhstan, still only 1% of the bread sold in Kazakhstan is sliced bread. In America, as I said, it's hard to find bread that's not sliced. So in Kazakhstan, nobody's marketed sliced bread very well. That's a simple example, but it makes my point. Just because you invent something, just because you're a technologist who can help create something, doesn't mean you will benefit from it. One of the most influential thinkers in the world of business management is Clayton Christensen. Every 2 years, the UK universities vote on the brightest business management mind in the world, and for 4 years running, it was Clayton Christensen, and I'm going to be sharing some of his ideas. I'm going to skip over a lot of slides. You can read this on your own. I'll make the PDF of this available, and this will be on the website that I'm creating for you. But the bottom line is that he is respected as one of the top business minds. His book, The Innovator's Dilemma, is has been judged to be one of the top 10 books ever written about business management. Again, you see links where you can watch some of his videos. Disruptive innovation he's the creator of that concept. And disruptive innovation does not necessarily mean something's bad. It just means it's changing the economy, changing the marketplace. And so disruptive innovation describes the process by which technology enables new entrants into the market, provide goods and services that are less expensive and more accessible, and eventually replace or disrupt well-established competitors. There's a little bit here about Dr. Christensen. Anyway, my effort today is to explain how this pertains to you, current or future creators of potentially disruptive technology. So Dr. Christensen explains that top companies are forced to, when they're faced with new, cheaper, even if it's inferior products, they are forced to decide whether to make better products for their current customers and make at the higher profit margin, or to compete with the lower quality products that are coming into the marketplace that their customers don't want, and which would actually compete with their current products or services. And so this is the dilemma that they face. One of his examples that he thought about when he first left his business career, he was very successful in business, and then went back for his doctorate and decided to become a professor. So one of the companies he thought about, because he knew the executives at the company, was a company called Digital Equipment Corporation. Now, of course, in the early days, you know that the computers were called mainframes. They're huge computers, cost multi-millions of dollars, required a lot of expertise to run them. And most companies, most institutions could maybe afford one, and that was pretty much it. Well, Digital was one of the companies that disrupted them with what they called the mini computer, which wasn't so many by today's standards, but their computer cost about $250,000 to $500,000 and was quite competitive with the mainframe computers, and gradually was putting them out of business. But then along came the PCs. And in the early years, the PCs were really, really crummy. As you typed on a PC, it could not keep up with a halfway decent typist. And so it really was bad quality. Nonetheless, somebody from Digital went to the executives and said, hey, we need to get into the PC market. This is the new thing. But again, they ask themselves that question that Dr. Christensen poses. Here they are making about a 40% profit on machines that cost up to $500,000. And the idea was, do we get into the PC market for a couple $1,000s and compete with ourselves with a crummy product that our current customers probably aren't going to want? If they did want it, we'd lose lots of money. And so they chose not to go into the PC market. And a few years later, they went out of business. Because that was the innovator's dilemma. What do you do when new innovation comes and confronts you? He talks about other examples as well. The innovative companies really do face the dilemma, as he says, about how to enter the market with new innovations without undermining their own products and services. Some of his examples include the case of when Lucent and Nortel were producing and marketing powerful, reliable circuit switching. Along came Cisco with their router, and their router originally was not fast enough to handle audio, handle voice. And so, again, Lucent and Nortel and others were faced with the question, do we introduce a crummy product that our customers don't want? In fact, they asked their customers, do you want us to produce and provide a router for data? It doesn't work for voice, but it works for data. That was the way it was originally. Well, their customers said, why would we want that? Let's stay with our dependable circuit switching. Well, the problem is that while they waited, Cisco was developing and improving their router and selling it just for data originally, but pretty soon got good enough for voice as well. And then they took over that market because Lucent and Nortel and others who were depending on circuit switching for their future found it wasn't the future. And their clients didn't understand, the clients could not give them good feedback. One of the questions that he asked is, do you always, one of the things you're taught in business is frequently is always listen to your customers. Well, that's what digital did, and they lost their market. That's what Nortel did, and they lost their market. So customers don't know what they're going to want in the future. And if a company depends on that, on asking their customers, they will probably be out of business pretty soon when you're dealing with things such as technology. There's other examples that he talks about, and again, I don't have time to go over everything, but another example, well, other examples of disruption aren't directly in the technology area. Uber replacing taxis, it certainly depends on technology, and so technology is speeding up this kind of disruptive innovation. But Uber is not a technology company. It uses technology in a way that allows them to compete efficiently using everyday drivers of their own personal cars, and they can undercut the price of their taxis. Same with Airbnb. For decades, for centuries, hotels faced no such competition. But along came Airbnb, again, not a technology company, but a company that uses technology to compete effectively against hotels. Another example he uses is back in the 1960s, the largest electronics company was RCA in America. And they were still producing what they considered high quality, but very large and expensive TVs and radios made with vacuum tubes. Along came, Sony came along, and they wanted to start using transistors. Transistors, the RCA people knew about transistors. They probably had more experts about transistors than Sony did. But RCA decided not to proceed with any transistor products. And Toyota entered the American, or Sony entered the, excuse me, Sony entered the American market with small transistor radios, very small that you could carry in one hand, very cheap and pretty crummy, really bad products. If you want to compare them in quality, very bad products. But they found, and what one of the keys to a startup succeeding against a monopoly, what would seem to be a monopoly anyway, is to undercut their prices and come in and try to find what he calls, what Clayton calls, are non-consumers. That is, people who can't afford the current product. Either they can't afford it or they can't handle it because they're not sophisticated enough, it takes too much training or whatever. There's something that's blocking them from using the new technology. And so the transistor radio produced by Sony found a new market, teenagers who wanted to listen to their rock and roll without their parents yelling at them about it. And of course, when the family only had a big vacuum tube based radio, which was about as big as a desk set at a side, and or a radio or a TV about the same, they typically only had one in the family. And so the family had to negotiate over what they were going to watch on TV or what they were going to listen to on the radio. So now the teenagers had their own pocket radio. Crummy as it was better than nothing. And so Sony created a new market of what previously non-consumers. But they gradually, as in the cases of also Detroit trying to fight off Toyota, they found that it wasn't worth their while to fight for this low quality, lower end of the market. And so in the case of RCA, they made better and better TVs and radios, but they did not explore, did not continue developing transistor radios and TVs, and Sony did. So Sony got very good at it. And they gradually took over the market, and of course, it's developed from there. In Detroit, same thing happened. Toyota came in at the bottom of the market, grabbed up non-consumers, people who couldn't afford a new car that was the quality being created by Ford and GM. And Ford and GM decided it wasn't worth fighting for the low profit, cheap cars that Toyota was making. And so they built better and better cars, bigger cars, and Toyota won over the mini car market, and then moved up, and now they've taken, they've challenged General Motors and Ford at every level, and now challenging Mercedes-Benz besides. So one of the questions is, or one of the things that you might hear at a business school is, don't waste resources on unprofitable product lines. Well, General Motors and Ford took that advice, and they lost the market to Toyota. Ignore low quality products, they might say. But what happened to RCA when they were challenged by Sony? Guy Kawasaki was an associate of Steve Jobs in the early years of Apple. And I've also placed some links here for his talks. One of them is called 10 Things He Learned from Steve Jobs. And one of the things he recommends is that you have to be looking to jump to the next curve. Contrary to what some companies think is, just everything stay at the status quo, you have to be looking to the next curve, because if you don't go there, somebody else does. But particularly if you're an innovator, that is the future. That is the next curve. That is your opportunity to create a startup that would compete even with a monopoly. He says also, Guy Kawasaki says, don't worry, be crappy. And basically he's reflecting what Christensen says. It didn't matter that the transistor radio was crappy, was bad, because it was going to get better. So you may start, if you're on the next curve, you start with something pretty crappy, pretty bad, and then you work to make it better. which is another one of his recommendations. Anyway, these are some of his recommendations, and I'll let you, again, I'll send you the PDF with this, and you can read those in your own. Another concept that Dr. Christensen talks about is looking for the job not done. If you're trying to compete for a place in the market, you need to ask yourself that question: what job is not being done? He also notes that if you're trying to market something, you need to know what job that thing is doing, because as Peter Drucker said, the customer rarely buys what the company thinks it's selling them. And so Dr. Christensen has an example. He was people were hired to analyze what was going on in the marketplace by several franchises controlled by one owner, I believe, of McDonald's. And they couldn't figure out why they couldn't sell more milkshakes. They kept doing market testing. They'd bring people in and they would give them samples, and the people would tell them which one they preferred. But despite all this sampling, all this research they were doing, they could not increase the sale of milkshakes. And so this really puzzled them, and they requested Dr. Christensen's help. So they went in and they just watched to see who was buying milkshakes. And particularly in the morning, they found something kind of interesting, is that people were driving up to the window, the drive-up window, and buying a milkshake, or they might run in and get a milkshake and then run out to their car, but most of them were driving off in their car with their milkshake. And so they finally, after a day or so of observing this, they stopped some of the buyers of milkshakes and said, basically asked that question: what is the job this milkshake is doing for you? Why are you buying a milkshake and not buying something else? Why aren't you buying a hamburger? Why aren't you buying a Coke? Why are you buying a milkshake? And finally, they were able to, at first, the customers were kind of confused about this. But after a while, they were able to get through to them, and they explained that in every case, these people were people who were having to commute, having to drive their car, perhaps an hour to work, or perhaps their job involved driving their car from one place to another. But they were going to spend a long time in their car. And what they found was that other products, and it wasn't just drinking products, if they also had previously, many of them said, tried other things like donuts or candy bars, things that they could consume while they're driving, because it's so boring to drive for an hour to wherever it was they're going. And so they went to McDonald's to grab a real thick milkshake that would take a long time to suck up through that little small straw they provided. And so then Christensen's group could come up with some suggestions on how to accommodate those people. By the way, the people who buy milkshakes in the afternoon buy it for a different reason, for a totally different job. But the people in the morning are buying it to fill up that time in an hour, and they want something that will take a long time to consume and will keep things interesting while they're driving. So as you begin looking, as you understand the market, products and services do a job. And so whether you're creating a new product or trying to market an old product, you need to figure out what job it's doing. Something as simple as a milkshake, it may be more complicated than many even professional marketers can understand the job that it's doing. So what you're selling is not what they're buying. What is the job? And what you want to sell may not even be what they're buying. Kawasaki mentioned that Apple would have gone out of business if not for a different company. Aldus was the company who created the first desktop publishing. And lo and behold, it was desktop publishing that really saved Apple from being overwhelmed by Microsoft and Microsoft operating system computers. Because desktop publishing that printers and newspapers and so forth use now on a regular basis to create digitally their publication, that required more memory, more RAM. It needed to be able to handle graphics better. And so desktop publishing, which was not created by Apple, saved Apple. So anyway, he has some comments to make like that. Dr. Christensen talks about problems, he calls actually finance formulas that they have, ratios are almost like a religion. For decades, companies around the world have lived by certain ratios, certain rules of finance that he says actually has killed many companies. And I'll explain why. There are three types of innovation, he says. That one is the disruptive innovation we've been talking about. But there are two other types of innovation. One is sustaining innovation, which is better, which is basically just making a current product better and better and better, gradually, making it better, competing with others in the market. And it does, in almost every case, every product ever created is gradually made better and better and better in that process. The third type of innovation is efficiency innovation. Efficiency is just how to do more with less. One thing he found from an economic perspective is that disruptive innovation is perhaps the only thing that actually creates new employment, that increases employment in the marketplace. Whereas sustaining innovation keeps it pretty much level, because if you buy a new product, you might increase your sales a little bit by them people dumping an old product and buying a new one. Certainly that occurs, but by and large, people are choosing between this product or that product, and so the fact that they buy the newest model doesn't affect the marketplace that much. On the other hand, the efficiency innovation actually hurts a company or country's economy, because by its very nature, the main place a company can save money is by firing people, by not having as many employees. And so technology in that case is used to put people out of business, so to put people out of a job in many cases. So there's three types of innovation that do impact the economy, but they also impact a company. And when going back to the ratios, one of the ratios that finance gurus have depended on is basically your internal rate of return. What can you expect? How much return can you get on investment? How safe is it? And how soon can you get it? Those sorts of questions. And they have a ratio to figure that out. And when you put all the elements into the ratio, it's pretty tempting to go after efficiency innovation. It's really reliable. I mean, it's pretty easy to make a profit by becoming more efficient. Not much risk, a very quick turnaround on your investment. And so using the formula of the finance gurus, companies have focused on efficiency innovation. At the same time, they're doing some sustaining innovation, improving their products. Certainly, that makes sense. But they recommend, no, we don't want to put too much money into disruptive innovation. It's high risk. Yes, it can be high return. It takes 5 to 10 years to pay out. Why don't we just stay with our sustaining and our efficiency innovation for now? And so companies take that advice from their finance gurus, and that pretty much leads to their destruction, because if they're not doing disruptive innovation, if they're not looking for the next curve, somebody else is, and that somebody else is not in their company. Anyway, I'll again flipping through some slides, but that's an important idea for a company, is they have to, if you don't invest in disruptive innovation, especially in a field that is being impacted at all by technology, then you're pretty much signing your own, death wish or whatever, death warrant. So if you're trying to start a new company, the question is, what are the jobs not done? What can we do that non-consumers or even current consumers, but they need something better. They would like something better if it exists at all. And we're talking about a lot better, taking a quantum leap, so to speak. So what is the next curve? What can we provide, especially to non-consumers, people who can't afford a product or who don't, or for whom the product is too technical, too complicated? I would say, for example, when as mobile devices started being created, I designed, but I never really marketed, didn't really even try to, but I had some time and I got bored, so I designed a real simple smart pad. It looks a little different than the ones do now, because it had a leaf in the center, had a folded in the center, so it looked like a book. Because I thought, what would my 80-year-old mother, how could I get her to use a computer, to read her books and so forth? And so my idea was basically, before iPad became iPad, this was in 2004, something like that, I designed this portable book that you would open shut. The outside would protect itself. It looked like a book, especially for the old people. And with just one or two buttons, one button would give you an index to the ebooks you had in it, but another button would get you to the internet, and you'd have a couple of real easy buttons to get, and it would still have the screen touch capacity and so forth. Anyway, you can always find, if you think about it and think long enough, you can find some non-consumers. Those non-consumers, I think, still exist, although older people are becoming comfortable with smartphones and with smart pads. But I think there's still, especially if I'd done this 15 years ago, I think there'd been a big market for it. We see also that in looking for the job not done, that it may be that you can find a current monopoly that is not doing a job very well. So for example, the New York Times used to be a huge newspaper, and most of the daily newspapers were quite large, and they did lots of jobs. They sold cars, and they're not just new cars, but people could put a small ad, a real cheap little ad in to sell their used car. They could find their job, a new job in the newspaper. They could sell or buy a home in the newspaper. So forth. They find entertainment, help them unwind. So you have all these things that a newspaper did just 20 years ago that has now been totally disrupted, because now you have other companies competing. In America, I don't know if you have Craigslist in India, but in America, Craigslist is now dominating the sale of items. I use it for buying cars, real cheap. But also there's Autotrader.com is specifically for cars. Craigslist is for anything you want to sell or buy. You have companies like Monster.com who help you find a job. You have Realtor.com who specialize in real estate. You get business news from other locations like Bloomberg. You have, anyway, just lots of things. These have broken up, including not just for newspapers, but also for banks. Banks in America were not, handled all sorts of financial transactions. But pretty soon they became, sorry, this slide isn't very clear, gained a lot of competition for small business loans, a company called Kabbage. For growth loans, there's another company specializing in that. For checking and savings accounts, you have some kind of non-banks. For payments, you have PayPal. You can pay internationally with PayPal. For student loans, they have specialty company for that. So even banks are being confronted by competitors who are stealing pieces of their market and those competitors are making their services simpler. One stop, just go here for this one thing, and we make it really simple for you. You go to the bank, you sit there, you have to wait in line, and then you have lots of really extensive forms. They're kind of complicated. You don't quite understand them. And so these specialty providers simplify things. They may cost less, but even if they don't cost less, in that case, they're simpler, they're targeted, and they're taking over much of the market from banks. I have a couple of others I would recommend. This is a full presentation by Dr. Christensen to Google executives. And one of the most interesting parts to me is the question and answers thrown at him, the questions thrown at him by Google executives that he had to respond to, and he responds very well to them. But it's that sort of challenge and interaction is interesting. This is a discussion between him and Marc Andreessen. One of the first web browsers in the 1990s was one called Netscape. There's still one that's available called SeaMonkey. And it is basically, I think it is Netscape. It operates just like Netscape, and I think maybe Marc Andreessen, who created Netscape, donated it for people who still wanted, among other things, the Netscape had its own built-in web creator that other browsers don't have. And so I think a lot of us, I still use it for doing real simple web pages. I'll probably use it to do the website that I'm creating for you to look at as of Sunday, if you want to know more about these things. But anyway, Marc Andreessen was the creator of that, and he's now a venture capitalist who invests in lots of different startup ideas in Silicon Valley. So it's a very interesting discussion between Clayton Christensen and Marc Andreessen, two of the brightest minds in technology. So how can I benefit from this? I don't have the resources. Another guru of success is Tony Robbins. He says if you don't have the resources, then you have to be resourceful. This talk by him is very good. But in thinking about being resourceful, I think more of Dr. Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about how to build partnerships, how to find people to work with you. So if you don't have the money, for example, to create a startup, well, you find somebody who does have money. If you have money, but you don't have expertise, you find people with expertise. If you have ideas, and you don't have money or expertise, then you have to find both of those. And Dr. Covey has a lot of great ideas. His book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, many of you may have heard of that already, has sold tens of millions of copies. Last count I had was 25 million in 40 different languages. I'm sure it's available in India. And it's, again, along with Christensen's books, it's the 7 Habits is one of the most highly rated business management books ever written. But just going real quick through that, I'm not going to spend any time on this page. It kind of reviews his 7 habits. I'm going to talk about just a couple of them. One of them is being proactive. I'll just mention that very quickly. Being proactive is basically not accepting the status quo, not telling yourself, I don't have the resources, but you're proactive enough to go after, pursue your dream. And you can look at this video and others by Dr. Covey to talk about that, talks about that. In fact, he wanted, from a different source, I'm going to put up a video about a bagger. That is, this was a mentally disabled boy, probably an IQ of no more than 70, maybe 60, who the only job he could do at the grocery store was put groceries into a bag. But this is a story of how he totally changed not only that grocery store, but the chain of grocery stores by being proactive. So when Dr. Covey taught in his book that a proactive person could be 5,000% more effective than someone who's not proactive, who's reactive, I first questioned that, but then I started thinking about this study that I'll put up on the website. And indeed, he was more effective than anybody else in the grocery store, even though he was just a bagger. He actually changed the store more than the manager did in this case study. One of the other things he talks about in trying to negotiate, trying to understand, trying to work with people is to listen, seek first to understand, and then to be understood. Again, some videos to help you understand that. But we're running out of time, so I'm moving ahead quickly. Ultimately, you're trying to achieve synergy, and that's where people can really work with it. That's the key to somebody without resources being resourceful and being able to be part of a startup that could change the world. I'm going to skip over that. We have a couple of minutes. There's what he calls the third alternative is the alternative that you and other people gain together. That's part of your synergistic efforts together, brainstorming, come with ideas, better ideas than either one of you would have had by yourselves. And he has a lot of training. There's 5 training videos about seeking the third alternative. Most of the training is done by one of his associates, but it's based on his ideas. And so let me just go, I'm going to create on my website, and if some of you have interest, I'm going to create a synergy center. I want to create a site where people who have ideas can come, people who can make those ideas into reality with their skills and so forth can come, and investors can come to create synergy. So what I think that I'm going to put a video up about something I'm working on now called the Ngeti Project. I won't go any further into that. It's just an example. And I see we're about out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. The Ngeti Project, though, just real quickly, is a project that's going to create online curriculum for 1,000 languages in 1,000 languages, which is unheard of. But it's something that
Professor.
Yes, there we go.
Thank you very much, Professor. Students are having the next class.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your valuable lecture. Thank you very much, Professor.
Okay, well, I'll send you the PDF, and if the students want to know more, I'll have that website up in a couple of days.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.